Life Stories presents an inspiring journey of resilience, love, and self-discovery. Madison Harper thought love could bridge any gap. But when her wealthy husband Ryan Harrington chose his family over her, she was left heartbroken. Rebuilding her life from scratch, she transformed pain into power, launching a thriving skincare business and proving that success isn't inherited, it's earned. But fate had one final twist, a chance to stand before the very people who once rejected her. Would she seek revenge or rise above? Subscribe to Life Stories to begin today's journey. The day Ryan chose his family over me still plays in my mind like a broken record. I remember standing in our kitchen, the air thick with unsaid words, watching him pack his things while his mother's voice echoed through the apartment. "She'll never be good enough for a Harrington." I had heard Victoria say it before, but never with such finality. That day, it wasn't just a passing remark, it was a verdict. And Ryan was carrying out the sentence. I should have seen it coming. Maybe deep down, I did. But love has a way of making you blind, of making you believe that if you just try hard enough, just love deeply enough, you can bridge any gap. I was naive to think that love alone would be enough. My name is Madison, and I come from a world far removed from the polished halls and private clubs that Ryan grew up in. I worked my way through college waiting tables, studying in dimly lit libraries long after my shift ended, while Ryan had been raised in a sprawling estate, never knowing what it meant to check his bank balance before making a purchase. But none of that mattered when we met. At least, I thought it didn't. We had found each other in the most ordinary way at a small coffee shop where I worked part-time. He was charming, thoughtful, the kind of man who could make the world seem smaller just by the way he listened. For the longest time, I believed he saw me for who I was, that he loved me for it. But standing in that kitchen, watching him shove his designer shirts into a suitcase, I realized he had seen me all along. He had just never truly chosen me. "You can't just leave," I said, my voice barely a whisper. He didn't meet my eyes as he zipped up his suitcase. "My family, they're right, Madison. We come from different worlds." I tried to make them understand. But what? I cut in, the words sharp, my heart pounding. "My background isn't prestigious enough. My father wasn't a CEO." The coffee mug in my hand trembled, but I refused to put it down. "I thought you were different." Ryan sighed, rubbing his temple like he was the one suffering. "You don't understand the pressure I'm under," he said. "The family business, our reputation." "No, Ryan, you don't understand." I forced myself to step closer, forcing him to look at me. "I loved you despite your family's money, not because of it. And you let them decide for you." The doorbell rang. It startled us both. But I already knew who it was. Victoria walked in as if she owned the place, wearing one of her immaculate designer suits, her nails tapping against her purse with that same controlled elegance that had always unsettled me. "Ryan, darling," she purred, barely glancing at me. "The car is waiting. Your father is expecting us for dinner." For a moment, I hoped Ryan would stand his ground, that he would tell her to leave, that this was his life and his decision. But instead, I watched his shoulders slump, his fingers tightening around the handle of his suitcase. I felt something inside me snap. Victoria turned to me, her eyes devoid of warmth. "You should have seen this coming, dear," she said, her smile never quite reaching her eyes. "Someone like you, well, you must have known this was temporary." "Someone like me." I stepped closer, my heart pounding in my ears. "You mean someone who worked her way through college? Someone who understands what it means to struggle?" Ryan finally spoke up. "Mother, please." Victoria lifted a perfectly manicured hand, silencing him. "Someone common," she said simply. "We have certain standards to maintain. Surely you understand." And in that moment, I did. The weight of my wedding ring felt heavier than ever. Slowly, deliberately, I slid it off my finger and placed it on the counter. It made a soft clink. A sound so small yet deafening in its finality. I understand perfectly, I said. My voice steady despite the storm raging inside me. I understand that your son isn't half the man I thought he was. Ryan flinched. Madison. Don't. Don't what? Don't make this harder. I let out a bitter laugh. You've already made your choice. Ryan. You chose them. I turned to Victoria, looking her in the eye for the first time without fear. Without the desperate need for approval. Congratulations. I told her. You've won. She simply smiled. Victorious. But as I turned to leave, I couldn't stop myself from adding one last thing. Remember this moment, Victoria. Because I promise you, one day, you'll regret it. Her expression didn't change, but I saw the flicker of something in her eyes. Amusement. Maybe. Disbelief. But not fear. Not yet. I grabbed my keys and walked to the door, pausing only once to look back at Ryan. He stood there, trapped between his mother and his suitcase, looking lost and small. You know what's funny? I said. He didn't answer. I actually felt sorry for you once. I continued. Growing up with parents like these. But now I see you're exactly like them. And with that, I walked out. The door closed behind me with a satisfying thud. And as I made my way to my car, I didn't look back. I called Lauren the moment I got in. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold the phone. He's gone. I managed to say before the tears started. I'm coming over, she said without hesitation. Pack your bags. You're staying with me. I can't just. Yes. You can. And you will. This wasn't the end of my story. It was just the beginning. Lauren's apartment smelled like fresh coffee and vanilla candles. A scent so warm and inviting it made my chest ache. It had been a week since I left Ryan. And though I was grateful for her hospitality, I still felt like a guest in my own life, adrift. Unmoored. Unsure of what came next. You can't mope around my apartment forever, Lauren announced one morning, yanking open the curtains with the kind of enthusiasm that only she could muster at 8 a.m. It's been 2 weeks. I groaned, pulling the blanket over my head. I'm not moping. Oh really? She plopped onto the couch beside me, arms crossed. Is that what we're calling binge-watching sad movies and eating ice cream straight from the carton? I'm strategizing, I muttered. Lauren rolled her eyes. Come on. Get dressed. I have something to show you. Reluctantly, I followed her to her home office. Still in my pajamas. She tapped on her laptop screen, pulling up a listing for a small commercial space in downtown New York. What is this? I asked, rubbing my eyes. It's for rent, she said, her excitement barely contained. And you need to hear me out before you say no. I glanced at the price and winced. Lauren. I can't afford that. She held up her hand. Just listen. Remember those organic skincare products you used to make? The ones everyone at the wedding raved about? I blinked. I hadn't thought about that in months. What had started as a hobby, mixing natural ingredients in my kitchen to create face masks and moisturizers, had turned into a small passion project. Even Victoria, unknowingly, had once complimented my homemade face cream at the wedding. Before she knew about my background. There's a massive market for clean, sustainable beauty products. Lauren continued. And you already have the perfect formula. I shook my head. That was just for fun. I can't start a business. I don't have the money. Or the experience. Or what? The right last name? Her words hit home. I swallowed hard. I had spent so much time letting Ryan's family dictate what I was worth, what I was capable of, that I hadn't even allowed myself to dream outside of their approval. Lauren sighed. Stop letting them live rent-free in your head. I let out a breath, forcing a smile. I need caffeine to process all of this. We walked to our favorite coffee shop later that day, the air crisp with the first signs of autumn. As we stood in line, A man at a nearby table caught my attention. "Excuse me," he called, setting down his cup. "I couldn't help overhearing your conversation about natural skincare." I froze, suddenly self-conscious. "I'm sorry if we were too loud." He shook his head, standing to extend his hand. "Not at all. I'm Jackson. I work in business development, and I'm always looking for innovative ideas. Would you mind sharing more about your products?" Before I could politely decline, Lauren jumped in. She'd love to. In fact, she has samples in her bag right now. I shot her a look, but she just grinned and nudged me forward. With hesitation, I pulled out the small jar of face cream I always carried. Jackson took it carefully, examining the texture, inhaling the scent. "This is impressive," he said, flipping the jar in his hands. "What's the production process like?" I hesitated, then explained how I sourced the ingredients. My commitment to sustainable packaging. The careful balance of natural oils and extracts. The more I spoke, the more confident I became. Jackson nodded, clearly intrigued. "You know," he said, sliding his business card across the table, "I mentor startups in their early stages. Your idea has potential. But more importantly, you have something rare: passion and authenticity." I stared at the card in disbelief. "Why would you want to help me?" He smiled. "Because 15 years ago, someone took a chance on me when I was starting out. Sometimes, all it takes is one person believing in you." That night, I pulled out my old recipe journal. Pages of carefully documented formulations, customer feedback from friends, cost calculations, it was all there, waiting for me. I had stopped because Ryan's family made it clear they found my kitchen experiments embarrassing. Now, I saw them for what they really were. The first step toward something bigger. The next morning, with my hands trembling, I picked up my phone and dialed Jackson's number. "Madison," he answered. "I was hoping you'd call." "Let's do this," I said, surprising myself with my own certainty. 3 months later, I stood in my own small production space, a humble, sunlit room filled with mixing equipment and rows of natural ingredients. Harper Naturals was officially in business. Lauren popped a bottle of champagne, grinning. "You did it, girl." I shook my head, smiling. "We did it." Jackson raised his glass. "Actually, you did. You just needed to believe it was possible." As we toasted, he handed me a flyer. "There's a trade show next month," he said. "The perfect opportunity to launch your brand." I took the flyer, my stomach twisting in nerves. "Isn't that the one where all the luxury beauty brands showcase?" Jackson nodded. "It is. And you're ready." I exhaled slowly, looking around the small but growing business I had built with my own hands. "Okay," I said, squaring my shoulders. "Sign me up." Lauren clapped her hands. "That's my girl." And for the first time in months, I felt something new, something thrilling. Hope. The convention center was overwhelming. Rows of sleek, high-end booths stretched across the massive hall, each brand exuding luxury and polish. Harper Naturals, in comparison, felt small, just a modest stand with simple, sustainable packaging and a homemade touch. Jackson scanned the floor plan, frowning. "Your booth location isn't ideal. We're tucked away in a corner. But we can make it work." I swallowed hard, nerves tightening my stomach. Around me, teams in matching uniforms set up glossy product displays, their branding flawless, their confidence unshaken. "Remember," Jackson said, placing a reassuring hand on my shoulder, "you're not just selling a product. You're selling a story. Your story." I forced a smile. But deep down, doubt crept in. A story about a woman who had been discarded by her wealthy husband. A story about someone who once thought she wasn't enough. I shook my head, pushing the thought away. That wasn't my story anymore. The first day started slow. Buyers and journalists rushed past our booth. drawn to the flashier displays. I smiled at passing attendees, offered samples, tried to engage people, but most barely gave me a glance. My confidence wavered with each polite but dismissive maybe later. Then, in the late afternoon, an older woman stopped at our booth. She picked up a small jar of our hydrating night cream, opened the lid, and inhaled deeply. "This texture is divine," she murmured, closing her eyes as she applied a small dab to her skin. And the scent, so subtle, so natural. My heart leapt. "It's all organic," I explained, my passion creeping back in. "The rose oil is sourced from a small family farm in Oregon. No artificial fragrances. Just pure, sustainable ingredients." She smiled warmly. "I'm Margaret. From Bloom Beauty. We have boutiques in several major cities. Would you be interested in discussing wholesale options?" I barely contained my excitement. "I would love to." By the end of the day, we had 3 potential retail partners and a small but steady crowd forming around our booth. People were drawn to the simplicity of our packaging, the authenticity of our message. Jackson was right, the truth sold itself. Then I heard a voice that made my blood freeze. "Well, if it isn't the kitchen chemist." I turned to see Savannah, standing just outside my booth, arms crossed, amusement flickering in her perfectly made-up eyes. Savannah, the woman Victoria had always wanted Ryan to marry. A perfect match in their world. She smirked. "How quaint." I forced my expression to remain neutral. "Can I help you try something?" "Oh, I'm not here to buy," she said, feigning sympathy. "I represent Luxe Beauty now. We're launching our new premium organic line next month. Just wanted to see what the competition was up to." Her gaze flicked to our product samples, our growing list of orders, the way buyers were beginning to linger. She was nervous. And that meant I was on the right track. "Well," I said, my voice cool, "good luck with your launch." Savannah gave me a tight-lipped smile. "We won't need it." As she sauntered away, Jackson leaned in. "She's worried. Or she wouldn't have bothered coming over." The next day, we had a breakthrough. A popular beauty blogger raved about our night cream on social media. And within hours, our booth was flooded with new customers. By closing time, we had sold out of several products, and we had a waiting list for more. Jackson grinned as we packed up. "We need to scale up production. And fast." I nodded, my mind racing. "I know some manufacturers who." "No," I cut him off, surprising even myself. "We're keeping production in-house. Quality control is everything." Jackson smiled. "That's exactly what I hoped you'd say." The final day of the trade show, I arrived early to find a woman waiting at our booth. She introduced herself as the beauty director of a major magazine. "Your brand has created quite a buzz," she said. "Would you be interested in being featured in our Rising Stars section?" I could barely breathe. "Absolutely." As we discussed details, I noticed Savannah watching from her luxurious booth across the aisle. Her expression had soured. The magazine feature would come out just before Luxe Beauty's organic line launched. Perfect timing. That evening, as we celebrated our success, Jackson handed me an envelope. I pulled out the card inside and felt my breath catch. An invitation to speak at a charity gala. "The theme is innovation and sustainability in beauty," he explained. "They want you to share your journey." I read the event details, and my stomach twisted. The Harrington Foundation was one of the main sponsors. Ryan's family. I swallowed hard. "You don't have to accept," Jackson said gently, reading my expression. "Yes, I do," I replied, my voice stronger than I felt. "It's time to show them exactly who I've become." Lauren raised her glass. "To facing our fears head-on. To karma," Jackson added with a knowing smile. I touched my glass to theirs, thinking about how far I had come. My small business was growing beyond my wildest dreams. And now, I had a platform to tell my real story. To authenticity. I said. And to never letting anyone make me feel small again. 3 days before the Harrington Foundation Gala, I stood in front of a full-length mirror while Lauren fussed over my outfit. The emerald green silk dress fit like a glove, exuding confidence and power. I should have felt ready. But instead, my fingers kept smoothing the fabric. My nerves betraying me. "You're fidgeting again," Lauren said, adjusting my blazer for the 10th time. "I'm not fidgeting," I muttered. She gave me a pointed look. "What's really bothering you?" I hesitated, then exhaled. The entire Harrington family RSVP'd, including Ryan. Lauren crossed her arms. "So what?" I didn't have an answer. I'd told myself this wasn't about them, this was about me. About my business. About proving to myself that I belonged in this world. And yet, the idea of facing them again, of standing in front of a room full of people who once dismissed me, made my stomach churn. "You are not backing out," Lauren declared. "I wasn't planning to." "Like hell you weren't," she scoffed. "You've worked too hard for this moment." The boutique owner approached, handing me the garment bag with the final alterations. "Would you like to try it on one more time, Miss Harper?" I shook my head. "No. I just need some air. Outside." I leaned against the building, taking deep breaths to steady myself. "Madison." I turned at the familiar voice, my stomach flipping when I saw Richard Harrington, Ryan's father, standing a few feet away. He looked the same as I remembered, impeccably dressed. Every strand of silver hair in place, but something about him seemed older. "Hello, Richard," I said, straightening my spine. He cleared his throat. "I heard you're speaking at the gala." "That's right." For a moment, he hesitated, as if choosing his words carefully. "Tiffany and I were surprised to see your name on the program." I let out a short, humorless laugh. "I bet you were. Surprised that the woman you dismissed built a successful company?" Richard looked uncomfortable. "Perhaps we were." He stopped himself. "Look, Madison. About the past." I held up a hand. "Save it. I have a fitting to finish." Back inside, Lauren took one look at my face and sighed. "Who did you just run into?" "Richard." She groaned. "Did he apologize?" I snorted. "He tried." "Good," she said firmly. "You don't owe them anything." That evening, I buried myself in work, reviewing production schedules and shipment plans. A knock at my office door made me jump. Jackson walked in, holding takeout bags. "Figured you might need dinner and moral support." I smiled gratefully, taking a container of pad thai. "Ran into Richard today." "Ah." He sat down. And nothing." I walked away. I picked at my food, my appetite suddenly gone. But seeing him brought everything back, the way they looked at me, like I was nothing. Jackson leaned back. "Good." I blinked. "Good. Use that feeling," he said. "Channel it into your speech." I let out a breath. "I don't want revenge anymore, Jackson. I just want to prove them wrong." He smiled. "That's exactly why you'll succeed." The next few days passed in a blur. The magazine feature on Harper Naturals hit newsstands. And suddenly, my inbox was flooded with inquiries. Orders skyrocketed. Retailers wanted meetings. It was everything I had dreamed of, and I barely had time to process it. And then, the morning of the gala, my phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. "I heard you're speaking tonight. We need to talk. Ryan." My hands trembled as I stared at the screen. I hit delete without replying. "Madison?" Lauren poked her head into my room. "Car's here. Are you ready?" I glanced at my reflection. The woman staring back at me looked different. Confident. Successful. No trace of the heartbroken girl who had walked away from her apartment a year ago. "Almost," I said, fastening my grandmother's necklace, the only family heirloom I had. In the car, Jackson went over the final details. "Remember, You're on before Savannah now. Not after. I frowned. What? Why? Because a familiar, silky voice interrupted. I requested it. I turned to see Savannah standing near the event entrance, wearing a gown that probably cost more than my first apartment. I prefer to close the show, she said sweetly. Jackson narrowed his eyes. The schedule was set weeks ago. Savannah smiled. Things change. Then, with a smirk, she added, by the way, Madison, have you said hello to Ryan yet? He's been asking about you. My comeback was cut short by the event coordinator calling for speakers. As I walked away, I heard Savannah's theatrical whisper. Poor thing. She still looks so provincial. The speaker's preparation room was mercifully empty. I gripped my notes, trying to block out the murmurs of the growing crowd. The door opened. Madison. I turned. My breath caught. Ryan. His hair had more grey in it than I remembered. His eyes uncertain. The same eyes I had once loved so deeply. Don't. I said. My voice cold. Whatever you're going to say, just don't. You look amazing, he murmured. I've been following your success. The magazine feature. The Gala invitation. Of course. Funny how my success suddenly made me worth talking to. I moved toward the door, but he blocked my path. I made a mistake, he said quietly. I let my family. No. I cut in. You didn't let them do anything. You chose them. Own your choice. Before he could respond, the event coordinator poked her head in. Miss Harper. You're on in 5 minutes. I pushed past Ryan without a second glance. As I stepped onto the stage, my heels clicking against the hardwood, I caught a glimpse of Victoria in the audience, sitting beside Richard. Savannah smirked in the front row. And Ryan? His chair was empty. I turned to the microphone, exhaled, and began. Good evening. My voice was steady. A year ago, I was told I wasn't good enough, that my background made me unworthy of certain circles. The Harringtons stiffened. But here's what I've learned. Success isn't about where you come from, it's about authenticity, determination, and staying true to yourself. As I spoke, I could feel it. I had already won. As I stepped off the stage, the applause echoed through the grand hall. Harper Naturals had made its mark. But more than that, I had proven to myself that I was never defined by the Harringtons or their rejection. I was defined by my own choices, my resilience, and the success I built with my own hands. Ryan caught my eye from across the room, his expression unreadable. But it didn't matter. I wasn't that heartbroken woman anymore. Outside, Lauren and Jackson raised their glasses. To new beginnings. Lauren toasted. No, I said, smiling. To being exactly who we're meant to be. The city lights shimmered above us. And as I checked my phone, another major retailer inquiry lit up the screen. Success, I was learning, was the sweetest revenge of all. Subscribe to Life Stories for more inspiring videos.